Back with another one question from a professor in the field. Today, we were able to get one question answered from Daniel Yudkin. He's a professor of psychology at the University of Pennsylvania in the Arts and Sciences Department. This is the study that he did, The Perception Gap, How False Impressions Are Pulling Americans Apart. Give me 1 second to fix that. Sorry. Cannot read that. Okay. Just give it a second. Sorry. Because there's some good information I'll cover. And boom. Okay, here we go. So this is the book or white paper that he wrote, or book, The Perception Gap, How False Impressions Are Pulling Americans Apart. This is what it was. Deepening polarization is affecting American life in many ways, causing increased interpersonal conflict, preventing progress on shared concerns, and undermining Americans' faith in democracy. A key driver of this polarization is the suspicion and distrust that exists between Americans of opposing political views. I've heard that before. This report provides insights into the ways in which opposing partisan groups perceive each other. It compares the extent to which Republicans and Democrats think they disagree with the amount they actually disagree, aka a perception gap. It also examines how personal attributes, educational attainment, and behaviors, media consumption can broaden or narrow perception gap. These insights are intended to not just to describe a problem, but inform efforts to improve understanding between opposing partisan groups. This study forms part of More in Common's Hidden Tribes Project, a goal which is to understand and counteract growing forces of polarization in the United States. One finding that emerged during our qualitative research interviews with Americans was a disconnection between the way participants described Americans from the opposing political party and our own experience of those from the opposing political party and how we interviewed them. We've talked about this, that people will have more affective polarization. So I'm this different from you, but I view myself as this different from you, much, much further. Some of the major findings were Democrats and Republicans imagine that almost twice as many people on the other side hold extreme views as they actually do. So Democrats think, Republicans are bad people, and maybe some Republicans are bad, but the Democrats have an impression that like 20% of Republicans are bad, when really it's only 10, and the vice versa, something like that. On average, Democrats and Republicans believe that 55% of their opponent views are extreme, but in reality, only about 30% are. So both parties view that the majority of the other party has extreme views, when actually the extreme views are the minority of the other party. But both sides feel, no. Extreme views are not the minority of your party. They're the majority of your party. So real perception and actual perception gap. Americans with partisan views hold more exaggerated views of their opponents. Members of America's exhausted majority have a narrow perception gap than either of the wings. America's more politically partisan groups. Consumption of most forms of media, including talk radio, newspaper, social media, and local news, is associated with a wider perception gap. For example, people who consume news most of the time are almost 3 times as inaccurate as those who consume it only now and then. So trying to be a news junkie and trying to follow the news about politics makes you worse at actually understanding what's going on. Furthermore, those who post about politics on social media show a substantially larger perception gap than those who do not. So let's say you're very politically active. You're more likely to be extremely polarized because you're more likely to be politically active. A lot of people have said for years that we need people to be very politically active because it helps democracy. Now we're saying very politically active people may be the worst for democracy because they may be the most inclined to be polarized. And people who watch news a lot are about 300% off of reality. And this is on top of an already background noise of a majority of Republicans and Democrats believing that the other party, all of them or majority of them, have extreme views. Higher education among Democrats but not Republicans corresponds with a wider perception gap. This may be due in part to lower friendship diversity, as higher educated Democrats but not Republicans are likely to say that almost all of their friends share their political views. Very educated Democrats, more than Republicans, are likely to say that almost all their friends share their political views. The wider people's perception gap, the more likely they are to attribute negative personal qualities like harmful or hateful or brainwashed to their opponents. Overall, Americans' views are more similar to their political opponents than they realize. So people have a really bad impression of the other side that's 2 or 3 times worse than it actually is. Republicans are not as different from Democrats, but both sides feel that they are really, really different from the other, and that the other side has horrible views. This is effective polarization. So I asked him, you did this study showing polarization, and you were showing how the parties have different perceptions of each other. Is it better now than when you did the study a few years ago? Yes. He believes polarization has actually decreased in the last couple of years. He wrote that paper in 2019, 2023, so 4 years ago. Is there less political polarization now in 2023 than when you wrote your paper in 2019? Yes, I believe there's less polarization now than 3 years ago. So he's saying he believes there are fewer Democrats who believe everyone on the Republican Party has some extreme view. And there are fewer Republicans who believe all Democrats have an extreme view than there was 4 years ago. If we traveled back in time 4 years ago, we would find a higher number of Democrats who believed all Republicans had an extreme view, and we would find a higher number of Republicans who believe that all Democrats have an extreme view. He's saying it's calmed down a little bit on this effective polarization in the last 4 years. He's one of about 4 or 5 people out of 70 who said that. So we'll add him to the list. And that's why I like doing these one questions, because sometimes the only question we can get is we can talk to somebody who's done a political polarization study, and we can say, is it worse now than when you did the study? And they're qualified to answer that question, and it's a simple question to answer, so it takes them a little time. And the reason we do this, we can add this up. We got about 70 people who say it's worse, and we have about 4 or 5 professors who say it's better. So I'm not saying what it is. I'm simply providing facts to you, and you can think for yourself. Okay, we'll leave it there, and we want to say thank you for checking us out.